Influence Group for the continued support for the breakfast series. A big round of applause for the Digital Influence Group. And anyone who's out there on the Twitter sphere and so forth, hashtag for today is SMB31. I think we've kind of kept a track for the past 30 so I think most of you know what we'll be doing on that particular end. I'm really excited about this particular breakfast, unlike all the other breakfasts, guys. Because this is one of the first ones in a long period of time where we're jumping the 101. We're not talking about different increments of where social is going and where digital market is going. We're really talking about how it's actually being applied today and what major CMOs need to be thinking about in the future. I'm really excited about this panel. David Oksman, head of marketing over at Life is Good. David Cooperstein down at the far end over with Forrester. Jeff Ruscito from Reebok. And Brian Babineau right here from Babineau from Digital Influence Group.
I like to French it up a lot.
Exactly. The CMOs, CMOs have to overcome the current divide between digital marketing, brand marketing, PR, social programs, all to successfully develop and implement compelling brand experiences. And experiences that matter, experiences that actually move, and they're entering the world where digital innovation is merging with all types of traditional marketing. And the fundamentals to create kind of new approaches and new brand leaders and models have to be successful and have to be merging together. They're not about just integrating them from one another, but also kind of amplifying the effect of one another and understanding what it means from different avenues. And not just social for social's sake, and not digital for digital, and not traditional marketing, but not just online and offline, but really the whole brand experience that brings them all together. Which is why I'm really excited about the group here today and their experiences they're going to be sharing with us. And also because of one very simple, important fact. The average goldfish has a greater attention span than the human being. Goldfish have attention spans of 9 seconds. Or actually, the other way around, I apologize. The goldfish has 12. We have 9. 5,000 media messenger hit us daily to the average kind of online consumer throughout the country.
That's amazing.
We were talking a little bit about paid and earned. This looks a lot better on the laptop. I must tell you that's right here. But anyways, back in the day, it was a combination of like you bought, you paid, and you owned, and then there was just a tad bit of earned media. We're seeing that the whole merging, this is what I'm from my particular perspective, is that you're paid and you're paid. It's actually, and your earned media are really kind of, your own media are really kind of materializing on, like, so how you decide to, what you decide to kind of create for your own brand experiences are actually your own earned and owned media. And they're all kind of like, whatever the alchemy is, it is all kind of merging in together. It's the influences you're going to be having. You no longer think about your brand as just one single brand and identity. Your brand is not going to be just one unit that this is what we want to be projecting out. It's going to be built upon all different types of ways to kind of solidify what that brand presence is to your customers and to your partners. And it's going to be what I consider, a combination of digital touch points and then physical touch points. And a combination from awareness all the way to brand loyalty and the whole cycle. These are the things you need to be considering right now from the CMO perspective and from the consumer perspective, how they want to be touching. Which brings me to introduce David to kick it off, talking about here with his group with Life is Good, and talking about what they're doing with a combination of online and really kind of bringing that offline world experience with some of the events that they've been doing. So with that, David Oksman.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Happy Friday. It's gorgeous out there. So Life is Good. A lot of people who don't know really the depths of the brand think of us as a t-shirt company. But the t-shirt is just a vehicle for a message. It's actually, before there was social media, this was how you got a status message. And our brand is really about optimism, okay? And our mission is to spread the power of optimism. That's what we do every day, whether you're in product, sales, in our nonprofit space. Everyone is there to spread optimism. And for us, it's not life is perfect. It's not hearts and daisies. We're not a bunch of hippies throwing frisbees around every day. It's actually about what we learned from our community early on, which was that optimism is something that opens doors, that helps people overcome adversity, and when you've been through things, your propensity to appreciate life is far greater. And with that singular mission, throughout our history, we didn't have a marketing department at all. And early on, when we were about a $3 million company in the early 2000s, some consultants came in and told John and Bert, our local founders here from the Boston area, guys need to do some billboards, we need to talk about how soft the product is, let's get it going. And we didn't do that. And the reason we didn't do that was because our community, the people that loved the brand, before social media even existed, were sending us letters every day and telling us about the impact we were having in their lives. So we took those dollars, and instead of doing a big marketing campaign, we threw a pumpkin festival, which made a lot of sense. But it was actually a fundraiser. And the idea here was that we could use what we built for good, that we could bring people together and live a lifestyle around optimism that could actually do good for the world. And the concept of this one was actually, we spent many years trying to break the Guinness Book of World Records for the most jack-o'-lanterns lit in one place. And over a couple of years, it kept building and building. And this is over 30,000 lit jack-o'-lanterns in the Boston Common. And this is actually the most people in the Boston Common since the Vietnam War protests was on this day. And we got a lot of PR out of it. This is in the 2006 time frame. And the idea here was that one person can do something really special, like carve a jack-o'-lantern. But collectively, we can do something really beautiful. And that's really what social media and community building for us is all about. We leverage those things to help kids in need. So whether it's selling a product, bringing people together for art, music, to appreciate what's right with the world as opposed to what's wrong with the world, whatever we're doing, it's all built around our mission, spreading the power of optimism and helping kids in need through our nonprofit. And that built over time. And again, even though we were throwing this festival, there was no marketing department. And we rented Fenway Park, and we had the Backyard Challenge, and we kept raising more and more money. And we weren't doing it because we thought necessarily, we knew it was going to bring people together that loved the brand, but we weren't necessarily doing it for commercial purposes. It felt good, and we were helping, and it became this sort of beacon, this pilgrimage for our brand and optimism. And it's solidified into what is now a 2-day music festival down by Blue Hills. We get kids bands, we get the greatest bands in the world, Dave Matthews, Jason Mraz, and it's a fundraiser. And we leverage social media to actually do peer-to-peer fundraising. So just like some people here might do an Avon walk, this festival is a fundraiser. And instead of it being you gotta do something really hard to give back, it actually became, no, you can do the things you already love to do. Play some games, listen to some music, and spread the word. Because at the end of the day, we're putting it into the consumer's hands to spread the mission. Whether they're wearing the product, whether they're coming to a festival and fundraising and telling their friends about the social mission of life is good and why we should all focus on what's right with the world as opposed to what's wrong with the world. And that's been really powerful for us. And the end of the day, to where Bob started and was talking about like PR and social media and how do you sort of align all of these strategies, for us, it's all the same thing. When you're focused on a singular mission, when you really know who your brand is, you can leverage all of these assets to do just that. So our customer service group is on Facebook every single day, on Twitter every single day, conversing, being a human company, connecting with our consumers. And over time, on top of just giving them little nuggets, whether it's a post on Facebook that is actually our graphics themselves, because when someone sees one of our half-full graphics, it resonates, it internalizes. They don't think we're, it's not about us, it's actually about what does that mean to you. If you're having a bad day, you might want a little inspiration. Or you might want to hear a story about someone who's overcome adversity. And this singular focus for us on that mission has really helped us build community. So over the past 2 years, we've got 1.7 million Facebook fans, close to 200,000 Twitter followers. We launched a radio channel online. It's over 400,000 streaming listeners per year. We throw a lot of events. We have these festivals. But the point isn't necessarily that they're divergent strategies. It's one singular lifestyle, and it's dictated not by us, but by our community. So as a privately owned organization with six partners who are part of Life is Good team, I always tell them one thing, which is that they have a seventh partner in the room at all times, and it's our community. So whether it's leveraging the feedback we get to develop new products, whether it's helping us spread the power of optimism through fundraising, or whether it's giving us new ideas. Who should we have at the festival this year? What events would you like to see us throw? You know, we've basically created a really amazing community of active enthusiasts who all rallied around our lifestyle and our mission with a singular focus. And when everyone in the organization is focused on that, when customer service, product, marketing all view the power and opportunity of what social tools can give to us, everyone wins and all ships rise within the organization. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, David. I like the part where basically there's like one singular focus upon optimism, and that's like the heart and the theme. And one question I have is,
Sure.
do you think that helps make it easier for all the other touch points of the organization to kind of know where to go and what to do with it?
100%. You know, I mean, it gives us, you know, if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing when the question just becomes, is it fulfilling the mission of the brand? And, you know, cynics always say, like, well, isn't that just, like, going to help you sell more t-shirts at the end of the day? And we're like, well, actually, yes, it is going to help us sell more t-shirts, but that's going to help us help more kids in need. So for us, that's what's really important, and the singular focus has proven to align everyone within the organization.
Nice. Great. Thanks again, David. Next up, Mr. David Cooperstein.
I'm not going to bore you with a lot of slides because I tend to do that sometimes. So, hi everybody. I'm just going to be really simple here. First of all, I'm not nearly as altruistic as you guys are. Forrester is a little more commercial than that. So I'm just going to explain two things that we see going on in terms of what CMOs are thinking about, and putting all of the stuff that Bob presented and a little bit of what David talked about into two really straightforward frameworks for people to think about as we go into the panel session. So I just have two slides. Very unusual for me. So the first is the customer life cycle, and most of you who are in marketing have lived for years with the marketing funnel, right? You know, and actually you showed a version of the marketing funnel with the sort of physical and digital going back and forth. The problem that we've always had with the marketing funnel is that the customer is not really represented in that process except as an output, right? Consideration is something you do to the customer to make them want your product, or awareness is something you do to them, you make them aware of the product. And so what we've seen, and what we think social media in particular has caused us to rethink, is that whole concept of a marketing funnel we think is dead. And we have to propose something. If you think something's dead, you have to propose the next framework here. We believe that marketers are starting to put the customer in the center, and the successful ones certainly are putting the customer at the center of their marketing process. So what is the customer going to be thinking about when they have to discover a new need, which is arguably in a circle you don't start somewhere, but we'll start with discover. So awareness is pushing messages out. Discover is informing people or getting them to understand that there's a new thing that they might want. In the explore phase, the customer is saying, how do I compare these different options that are out there? So unlike consideration, which is a similar concept, this is about the customer, where they go to get the tools and the messages to help them make a decision as they go through their process. The buy phase is one that actually the purchase process in the funnel is just a pure transactional thing, and things keep winnowing down to the purchase process. In the buy phase, this is where the marketer, whether they are the retailer or the manufacturer, have to think about what is happening in that buy experience. So how is my product being represented at Target versus Walmart, or online, or in a store where I don't have any control over the display? So that's the buy phase. And then the engage phase is arguably part of that is social media, but the real critical part of this engage phase of our customer life cycle is getting back in touch with the customer, because after they've bought the product, that's when you really can start building a relationship with them. And the reason why this is a closed loop is that after you've engaged with the customer for a certain period of time, the natural inclination is for them, if they've had a good experience, and want to buy something from you again, or for you to help them discover a new need, which means that they are always discovering the thing that they need next through you rather than through advertising or some other messages. So I'll give you two examples of this. One is the example that is required in every presentation, and well, certainly last year, maybe not so much this year, which is Apple. But the interesting thing about Apple is that they sort of internalized this concept long before we came up with it. But think about what made Apple successful was the fact that they introduced this little device that had all your music in your pocket. Great idea. Didn't really work that well until they introduced iTunes. And then they helped you start to close the loop between what you wanted and what you had in your pocket on a regular basis. But that really wasn't the full story. when they launched the iPhone, they already knew people understood the idea of having a lot of things in their pocket on a single device that was smarter than what they had had in the past. But they started with a new interface that allowed people to touch the thing rather than just scroll a wheel. Then they launched the App Store so you could actually engage in things that you had to buy from Apple. So you discovered this need for things like Angry Birds or checking in for a flight on your phone without having to have somebody help you discover that need. They would market it to you. So that closed the loop a little further. What was really compelling about what Apple did was they have you on this phone for 3 or 4 years, or this interface that allows you to touch things that people really didn't catch up with very quickly with. And then people lined up for, does anybody remember just about 3 years ago, next month, people lining up at the Apple stores for the iPad, right? Now everybody has them, everybody in this room probably has one. What they did was introduce people to a concept that they didn't know they had. They were so engaged with their customers through the iTunes Store or the App Store that people who didn't know they needed a one-button computer that could sit on their lap while they're on their couch, nobody was asking for that, but people had this ravenous need to go buy those things to the tune of now 120 million devices. That was part of them understanding that they created an ecosystem, they created an experience for people to discover the next need through Apple rather than through some other means, that they would be able to continue to be successful. So that's really the magic behind Apple, and from a marketing standpoint, is understanding that the more you engage a customer directly, the less they're going to go elsewhere to discover a need. And then by that nature, they're not going to explore so much because they're already on your product. Another great example that I like is BMW. I don't know how many people here have one. But they're very crafty about something that they do. When they were the first car company to launch the 4 years of free oil changes. Now, anybody who buys a brand new BMW can afford the $2,000 over 4 years to get their oil changed, or whatever the cost is. What they did, though, they did this for a very specific reason, which was to bring people back to the dealer for 4 years. Two things happen when you do that. One is you get to know the service counter and all the quirks that may exist in that service counter. The other is you see the new cars on the floor while you're waiting for your car. And 4 years is either the time of a lease or a time that, especially when people are growing their families or their careers are growing, which is when they buy BMWs. They see the new model on the floor and they're like, well, the 3 Series is getting a little tight, maybe we need the 5 Series, or we had this old 2002 and we want to get a brand new car. So what they do is they keep people in that loop by specifically bringing them in and giving them free service, which doesn't cost BMW that much and doesn't cost it's not really a benefit to the consumer from a dollars perspective. It's the idea that it's a convenience that brings it back into the dealer. So they really understand this customer life cycle. Now other car companies do it. They did it more for competition reasons because BMW has grown quite a bit as a result. But just some examples of the customer life cycle and where it actually works. The other framework is about brand. And this is really important. So if you think about the customer being at the center and the customer having all these tools that we talk about all the time about, and every one of you hopefully is tweeting who's on your phones right now, your various devices, the consumer is empowered. And they're empowered to make decisions about brands that they've never been able to make before. I like to, when I'm talking to marketers, I usually say, don't think about the devices that are in people's hands today. Think about the power of the multi-tab browser. Because the multi-tab browser is the worst thing that could happen to competition for your product ever. Because I want to buy a product, so I'm going to open 5 tabs, and I'm going to see what the price is on at different sites, and I'm going to go through the buying experience, see what kind of discounts I can get, and then you got 5 choices, and then you make the purchase on the one that has the best deal for you if you're really a deal-savvy consumer. So what that means is that you've got to reinvigorate your brand, and we've done some research on what brand means to consumers in the 21st century. I'm not going to go through data because that would take up a lot of slides. But we looked at what brand means to people, and people's expectations of brands have changed because of the availability of information that's in front of them. So what we did was look at several things. We looked at brands who need to reinvent their North Star, and a lot of companies are going back to their roots to figure out how they communicate an authentic brand in the social media world. But what we looked at specifically from a brand perspective, and you actually touched on some of this stuff, you'll see this come through very clearly from a Life is Good brand perspective, is that we found 4 elements that brands need to focus on in order to become 21st century brands instead of 20th century brands. So in a world where you have a conversation versus where you just have push marketing. And by the way, the acronym is TRUE, so if you want to write that down, if you're going to write something down, you can start with the TRUE and then I'll fill in the gaps here. So, so the first thing about a true brand is that it's trusted. And there's always been a need to be trusted by brands, but this is about earning trust by being very transparent and authentic about what the brand stands for, and more importantly, being accountable. So trusted brand during the festivals, not being commercially focused. absolutely. You may wind up being a case study actually after this.
Free subscription sounds good.
So trusted, a trusted brand in our minds, Patagonia is a great example of this, where they have actually exposed their entire supply chain on their site for the people who really care about their products, but also care about how they're made. So you can see the picture of the person at the loom making the products. You can see how the supply chain works across the ocean from the Pacific to North America. You can also see how they box their trucks, because they're very efficient with their boxing, because they believe that that's part of the supply chain as well, and being efficient there also brings some benefits to people who care about the environment. So they're very conscious about the entire supply chain. That's how they get to be trusted as a brand. Remarkable. So in a social media context, if you're not remarkable, nobody talks about you. It's like a voice in the wood. You're a tree falling in the woods. The key thing about being remarkable is to find the thing that's going to make people talk. 50 million people said something about the guy who jumped out of space and landed on the ground from Red Bull, Felix Baumgartner. That is a remarkable thing. Not every brand can do that, arguably. Red Bull is a little bit extreme on the remarkable front. They do a lot of things that are unbelievable, and people say, wow, I can't believe I just saw that. I'm sure people tweet a lot at the festivals. So that's the kind of thing where you get, you may actually, this is working for me. Good setup here. So remarkable is about making your brand not just something that people remember visually, but something that they say, I want to say something about that because it really meant something to me. The third is unmistakable. So here's where most people would think of unmistakable as I recognize the logo, but unmistakable goes a lot deeper than that. And it's a funny example that I like to use here, but it's resonated a lot in the business-to-business segment for those of you who might be business-to-business marketers here. IBM has actually done away with, well, maybe that's overstating it, they've de-emphasized the big blue logo with the 3 blue letters IBM on a lot of their marketing. Their main focus is on this concept called Smarter Planet.
Yep.
And Smarter Planet has a lot broader context for people than the IBM logo, but the imagery that they use for Smarter Planet doesn't say IBM anywhere. It sort of looks like a planet with more hair than I have. But it's a really interesting set of icons that talk about smarter cities and smarter medicine and all these different things that IBM can enable. And it's become synonymous with IBM in a way that is unmistakable, but yet is not branding and advertising. So it's a really interesting concept for them to take an iconography that after 100 years of being a very solid brand, they've moved beyond having IBM be the thing that stand for the Smarter Planet concept. And it's unmistakable when you see people in the business world see that logo and they know it's IBM, and they see or they hear Smarter Planet and the first thing they think of is IBM. And then the last part is being essential. So, and this is a hard part because a lot of companies sell products. They don't think about embedding themselves in people's lives. But becoming irreplaceable in the lives of your customers is absolutely critical if you're going to compete in a multi-tabbed environment, because you have to be the place that people go to for the reasons that they don't have to think about over and over again. They're just part of their lives. So we have a lot of examples of this, but the most recent one that I've been experiencing, and I think is a good one, Amazon has become essential for a lot of people just because it's easy to buy from them. But now they're moving very aggressively into replenishment, which means you don't have to think about it, but it becomes the way in which you do some of your shopping. And it's an essential part of, you save money, you get it delivered to you, you don't have to worry about running out, and then you don't even think about going to Walmart, Target, or one of the drug chains. So it's a really compelling, essential item to some people's lives who have to get some of those basics replenished, and it's a discount, so it makes it even more essential. And we have some other examples there, but it's really interesting to see how they have evolved to not just become good at some of the other things like the box and the smiley face on the box and knowing that your stuff is packaged well, but actually becoming a part of the routine of your life. So that's the other framework. I don't know. You have to think about how you fit into the essential part, but we'll get there. But the other three you definitely fit in.
That would be life's optimistic approach.
That's right.
Always essential.
So that's those are the two things that I think set the ground rules for what we talk about later.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David. I like the example of IBM kind of evolving kind of into their, as opposed to just being a brand that signifies a company, but a brand that's committed to a movement to a certain degree and kind of evolving. So if they can change Big Blue into that particular aspect and do it very effectively, a lot of other organizations can as well. Miss Jess, head of marketing and digital, should be over at Reebok.
Yeah, I'm going to stay seated if that's okay with you guys. I actually head up the media department for the U.S. specifically at Reebok, which means that we manage all of the traditional marketing outbound communications as well as digital and now social. Really quickly, show of hands, how many people are familiar with Reebok? Okay. Can anybody tell me what the Reebok brand stands for?
You don't count.
Really quickly, what does Reebok stand for? What do we represent? Sneakers.
Lifestyle brand.
Very good.
And
So-
there's a before and after Paul Fireman too. We can talk about.
So both of those answers are correct. I have some snapshots up here of what we have on Instagram. You can see that Reebok, I think, is most known for being kind of a fitness and a sports brand, which we're very much rooted in that, given the sneaker category. But we also have a lifestyle side of the business, which is very much rooted in just sneaker as a fashion statement. And we hook up with a lot of key assets in terms of hip-hop and urban street culture. The reason I want to talk about that is it presents a unique opportunity because coming out within social channels, we not only represent the Reebok whole umbrella brand, but we represent these two very distinct and different categories. So that's a challenge when you're trying to have one unified voice in the social sphere. Another challenge is that we're global. I don't know if this comes out that much, but being a global company, there are some inherent challenges with social. Granted, we can geo-target stuff that we're posting, but I think a good example of our biggest challenge is the U.S. market in particular tends to launch products 6 to 8 months in advance of some of the other markets. So how do you really put some safeguards into place when you're talking about a product that may not be available in the UK or in Asia at that point in time? So it's really kind of shifting gears in terms of what you're doing that's product focused versus really being a brand focused in social channels. I mean, I think that a recent study actually came out that a lot of brands are really just using social for that purpose, talking about the brand, being able to identify what we stand for and what our mission statement is. And I think that's what we've been dabbling with since we started social media about 3 years ago. And David was at Reebok at that point in time. He was managing the e-commerce team. And he had the foresight to develop the Facebook page specific to our women's target audience. It was when we were launching a toning product. We saw amazing success at that point. We saw a really engaged community. But with that, we saw that social quickly became a hot potato, if you will, being bounced between our global marketing team and our local regions. And the question was coming up, who should really manage those pages? Should we have one page or should we have several local pages? And there are two different schools of thought. I mean, a lot of people believe, and I support this too, that having a local management system in place is important as long as you have the right resources. You've got a smaller group of followers and you have higher engagement. But then on the flip side, if you roll everything into more of a globally managed system, you have one unique brand voice, you have more control over what's being set out in all the different social pages. So I think that what we found is really meeting halfway between what the global team is trying to do as well as what the local markets are doing. And we decided that putting key stakeholders into place across the different silos of the company is how we really are starting to get this to work. So we pull in the marketing team, who's really being the voice of products and events that are happening at a grassroots level, keeping us abreast as to that calendar and what we want to talk about from a brand standpoint with those particular pieces. PR and customer service, extremely important. The PR team is the voice of the brand. Customer service, as we all know, once you start playing in the social space, these become quick forums for consumers to talk about the issue that a product is in their market, that a product is broken, or there, whatever reason, they come to these pages to air their concerns. So we want to make sure that we address it immediately. E-commerce, very important. We want to make sure that we're dialing into everything that's happening on our site. And I think that when we talk about our owned channels, for us at Reebok, it's not just Reebok.com, but it's all the digital channels that we own. So socially, and then also on our wholesale partner sites. We look at everything as our own media, and we want to make sure that we show up in the same way across all those pages, and the e-commerce team helps us to do that. And then media, my team really tries to pull everything together and kind of lead this massive ship in terms of making sure that we've got the right resources in place to keep this conversation going, to measure what's happening out there, and just make sure that we keep pushing the ship forward. That's where DIG comes into play. These are some growth numbers that we have just after 4 months of working with Digital Influence Group. We signed them on about 9 months ago, I would say, and we worked with them as a partner to really come in and help us to understand what's happening on our social pages in this space. We had initially brought them in to really help us develop some media programs to grow that audience base, but we quickly discovered that just listening to our community of followers was the most important thing. And within 4 months of just listening, responding, talking to, and engaging with these consumers, we saw some tremendous growth. And what were we talking about? Well, again, taking away from just those product-specific stories, we were talking about things that were actually happening on campus. Anne-Marie, I don't know if anybody's heard of Anne-Marie. She's our favorite at Reebok campus. She's 75 years old. She works the night shift, and she started doing CrossFit about a year ago. Swears it's her fountain of youth. We actually stumbled upon her doing a photo shoot in the box on campus. We were doing a people photo shoot with Rich Froning, who's the fittest man on the planet for 2 years running now. And I happened to look over and I saw this picture of Anne running with a sandbag over her shoulders. I was like, what is that? Who is Anne? And everyone's like, oh, we love her. They told us a story. So one of my coworkers decided, she's like, yeah, I work out with Anne every now and then throughout the week. Why don't I take my iPhone, follow her, capture her story on video, get some pictures and put it out there? So we did. We put it out on our Facebook page. We put it out on Twitter. It got so much traction, actually, that it was picked up by Fitness Magazine, and they decided to come on campus and do an interview with Anne and use her as an inspiration for their fan base. We then decided, okay, this is a great story, and this is something that's global, because there is no specific product tied into it. It just talks about how Reebok, as a fitness brand, is founded in inspiring people, making sure that they just get out there and get moving however they decide to do it. So we rolled this into a paid media program, and we partnered with Fit Sugar and Pinterest, and we put Anne-Marie up on our Pinterest page, and we talked about how she was such an inspiration, and we encouraged people to pin their fitness inspiration story for a chance to come to our New York City Fit Hub that had just opened and have a custom workout with their friend and go on a shopping spree and just really bring the whole story around full circle. And it also helped us to grow our Pinterest page, which was really important for this female audience. From a lifestyle side of the business, how many of you have heard of Whiteout Wednesday? Hashtag. Okay. So we are introducing, this is a campaign that has just gone into motion, and I should say that Ben Cobb, who works with me at Reebok, is here, and he's really leading this charge. I think it's a great example of how we're taking something that we've started to seed out with a lot of our assets on Instagram in terms of just taking a snapshot of you wearing your whites. It's Whiteout Wednesday. Every Wednesday, represent your white Reeboks. We've taken that and boiled it up now into a paid media program that's really encouraging people to go to Instagram, share their Whiteout story, and really be part of this movement. I talk about it. It sounds like Martha Stewart here trying to talk about like Snoop Dogg or Snoop Lion. Ben very much is the voice of the Classics brand, and he does a far better job in the social space in terms of really talking in that vernacular, which I think is another important point in terms of bringing things in-house and managing our social pages. You need to make sure that you have the right voice that's authentic for each side of the brand in our case. And so I think it's important that you make sure you have staff who's really in touch with that consumer, whoever they may be, and that they can speak to them on a one-to-one basis. That's our story.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. So let's all maybe give them a little shout out and a little Twitter love with the whole Whiteout Wednesday. Could be a fun thing. Help the man here who's turning more red than I do. So just a thought on that one. And the last presentation today is Mr. Bryan.
Hi.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you for being here. Did you all enjoy the Smooth 80s jams this morning? Mood for social media breakfast. So I want to start with the challenge. We're talking about getting beyond social and getting beyond silos, and why is it so hard with social media? Like why is social still off on its own island? And part of this is we've made this problem ourselves. We've gone from the promise of social behaviors on the web to social being a thing, which means social itself is fragmented based on our own definitions of what we've done as social. As brands do more and activate things in social, that becomes the way they define social. And so social becomes a thing instead of just being a behavior that you can actually activate digitally. For some people, social is community management, where you're able to talk to an aggregate of fans who have gathered around your brand or your products. And that's how you think about social, and that's how you define it. For some folks, it's a brand campaign vehicle, where you're able to sort of push out brand assets and engage folks around what you stand for. Obviously, David's team does a great job of this. All these guys have set this part of the presentation up really well, so I'll be referring to them a lot here. Social and traditional digital media, as the social media platforms have become more sophisticated in ways that they can enable advertisers to buy eyeballs, that's become a way people are activating it. Social as a customer service channel, Jess touched on this. People love, consumers love to talk to their brands and get responses instantly. And so that's really part of the challenge, is that folks define it based on their own experience instead of thinking about it as a behavior they want to activate for their marketing plan. The minute you define it as a thing, it becomes that thing instead of being a behavior you want to take advantage of. And some folks even define it as any mix of these things. This is obviously part of the issue also, is that you think social is the 4 things that I've done from this list. Or social is, in many cases, the default. Social is up here on the right, these channels. It's a little bit of something that's been happening in digital media forever. For me, 8,000 hair follicles ago, when brands would say, I want to do something on Yahoo. Or it became, I want to do something on YouTube. I need to get involved in the Google. And that was the tail wagging the dog, right? That was not a plan. That was I see a thing and I want it. We used to call it the shiny bauble syndrome. It's been around forever. It was around well before digital even. It's a marketing problem, right? I want to be on TV. I need that spot on Seinfeld. I want to have a commercial for Seinfeld. And that's really what's happening in social. Now social has become so broad, and the way people get their arms around it is tactically instead of thinking about it strategically. So how do we solve for that? We have a simpler focus. We think about storytelling first. The storytelling comes from 2 places. The story you're telling is the story that a brand wants to tell. Are you telling a brand story about what you stand for and who you are? Are you telling a product story? Are you telling a story about an event? Are you telling a story about your integration into March Madness as a sponsor and advertiser, what that means to you? The other component in storytelling is what is your audience talking about? What do they care about? We call this the center of conversational gravity. You can get real-time feedback right now of what your target cares about, what they've talked about, how they feel about you in the past 24 hours. We can pull that right now. And if you don't use that to inform the story you're telling, then you're not producing anything that's relevant or interesting for them. David did a great job. They have this story, don't they? I mean, Life is Good has it. They have a simple story, what they stand for, and it's both about them and about their customers. It's really simple. You understand exactly why you would care about Life is Good. You understand why Life is Good cares about Life is Good. You understand what they stand for. So defining your story is a really important first part. Activation, this is a word that's become more and more prevalent as a how you start to market and think about solving for these silos and solving for getting beyond social into broader activation. And this is really starts with what is the content and what are the voices you can use and harness to help bring your story to life. Content marketing has become more prevalent. Content is the thread that connects lots of these channels. It's the thread that can pull an experience through that journey that David Cooperstein talked about. How do you do that? You think about the content and voices you have, the content and voices you create, the voices out in the marketplace that are either influencers or voices you have internal that can help bring a program to life. And then you start to connect all the dots to all of your marketing programs. Where is that content? Where are those voices relevant? For us, we've been able to work with partners and clients where those voices and that content is relevant as far-reaching as the front page of magazines or in television. That helps forward that story and bring that story to life. And the last part is one of the trickiest parts, right? It's content choreography. Because it's one thing to have lots of content, and content marketing is becoming more and more sophisticated. You've probably seen the news in the past 6 months as agencies are starting to have VPs of content come out, and brands are starting to have people who lead their content story. That's one part of it. It's a great thing to have content. Content's a really important part of marketing in today's sort of digitally connected social world. But how you get that content out in the marketplace is really important. How you think about organizing yourself to do it. When you looked at David Cooperstein's journey, and you think about how you go from buy to engage, anyway, I'm supposed to be introducing the new product to the customer, so I'm talking to them the entire time. And how do I do that if I'm not lucky enough to be the Apple device that's in this person's pocket all the time, or if I'm not lucky enough to be the BMW brand, where of course I want the BMW garage to take care of this beautiful vehicle I just invested in. If you're just marketing with content and voices and stories, how do you choreograph that so you are able to engage over the long term, able to think about constantly being in touch with your audience, an audience that demands conversation and contact in real time, all the time, to be constantly engaged and to care. Here's how we think about it. We have a thing we call the constructive eights. This is how we think about organizing to develop and push content out into the marketplace in a way that we think helps pay off that life cycle, helps build a story through content and through voices, and carry that story through all of its evolutionary parts. So you establish a story arc. We talked about the storytelling. Jess talked about how for Reebok they've got 2 stories. It's a fitness story and it's a classics and lifestyle story. For David, it's a simple story about optimism and a vision for how people should be and act. For us, we establish a story arc and we start with 8-week content. 8-week, this is longer form things. These are the things it takes you 8 weeks to create. These are your big programs. These are big marketing programs. These are it's your sponsorship of March Madness. It's your product release. It's your new brand positioning. It takes you 8 weeks to build up. That's your long form story. That's the umbrella under which things live.
I like you can do it in 8 weeks, so that's good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a promise. No, I'm kidding. 8 days. These are the things that are, it takes you 8 days to create a story around an event. You've got a live event and you want to build up some momentum before the event. You want to capture what happens at the event. You want things to happen afterwards. You should be investing time. Think about a product release and how you will position that under the umbrella of the 8-week stories that are the bigger story arcs. 8 hour, this is strategic daily content. This is the trickiest part for a lot of folks to connect these dots. We have some people who are doing a great job of getting this out here. This is when you're publishing content regularly. You're out in the marketplace. We were talking earlier, and Oreo does a great job of doing this. They capitalize on news and relevancy. They react to stuff, and they put out baseball-shaped, baseball-colored Oreos, and they publish that out. The trick for them is that it's not connected to something bigger, right? And then that's part of the brand impact is being lost because there's no longer form story that is helping inform what the strategic daily content will be, so it feels connected and holistic as an experience. And the last piece is the 8-minute, which is urgent responsive content. That's when you're live and fresh. You're there on the channels. You're responding to questions. You're pointing people to customer service when they need it. You're answering questions about where they can get a product. You're sharing news releases. And so this is how we think about the choreography. We think this is one of the most important parts of paying off some of the promises and the frameworks that we talked about, but also paying off the story. You want your audience to understand the story, and getting beyond social means thinking about this in a channel agnostic way. It's a socially enabled world. And every media interaction and every content interaction, there's an opportunity for somebody to engage socially. Whether you think about the framework the way David did, or the framework Bob showed where people are toggling all over the place, and for each individual, that toggle will look different. That journey that they take with the brand. And so this is about how do we create content that brings a story to life, how do we create a story that's long-lasting, get it out into people's hands through whatever channels make sense. And that is us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. I think the interesting aspect I like about that one the most is actually the word choreography. It's not the content per se, but it's understanding the audience, what's going to work. Is there a Fosse moment? There's a movement shot moment. What is it going to do? Movement shot. But the thing I like about it also is it's like, we also talk about celebrating the customer and knowing what they are and creating the content and the brand experience around their pain, need, passion, not around the platform per se. And when Sony was saying one of our choreography moments is we want to celebrate the customer, not our work. So they put a whole great, anyone's ever seen the Sony ad a while ago where it says it's all about mic to mic, where they did this amazing routine where basically they had every video character they ever had, and they did the Sony Life ecosystem, all celebrating this one individual. And it was just nothing but this one little player who was like a 14-year-old nerdy kid sitting in his little basement playing on this game. But that was a celebration of their customers and the passion, the joy that goes. And that was their kind of element of their choreography.
And actually, Oreo does have a point to all those little things, because their whole North Star is celebrating childhood, and childhood is about impulsion.
That's true.
So they do things like they did at the Super Bowl, which they obviously planned a lot to do. They just didn't know what it was going to look like, but it's all about that impulsive behavior, which is what kids like, and yeah. So that actually strings it together, but it may not be as obvious to adults.
It's true. It's too bad they didn't get. You can only just eat one with the potato chips. They said that's we can only be half a silo.
Well, they want you to eat the whole sleeve.
Exactly. Exactly. Just next, we'd just love to open up just a little panel session, if you will. Going to ask kind of a variety of series here, kind of on the main themes here, to kind of go do a dialogue back and forth as well. As we're doing this, if there are questions from the group here as well, to kind of spur it on, feel free to join in. Or let's just kick it off with one.
Hi, my name is Angela Sun. I'm a senior at Tufts University, and my question is for Jessica. So you talked about how Reebok has the two different messages as well as a really diverse global reach. But I also know in the last year, one of Reebok's, in terms of social media, one of the big initiatives was streamlining its accounts, and especially kind of making that decision between favoring global or local accounts. And so I was just curious in terms of that experience, what have in terms of like, what has the experience been in terms of finding the balance between narrowing down the counts, but also being able to have enough channels so that you can create that kind of targeted content distribution?
It's a great question. I think it's a long process, having to go out and roll up all the Twitter handles, Facebook pages underneath one global platform. I think it's definitely been very beneficial because it's helped to really expand the number of followers on each of those pages and make sure that we are more cohesive in terms of what we're saying on those pages. And I think that it's really forced everybody internally to kind of break down some of those silos and work more together in choreographing, like how you're getting news stories to go out on time. You're working with a PR team, they're changing the way that they're pitching stories. And the way that we found at a market level to really control everything is that we do have a global calendar from the global marketing team that we adhere to. But we supplement that with a lot of specific marketing stories that we leverage some of our local assets to help us amplify. So whereas we may be launching it on our Twitter handle in a brand standpoint, when we want to talk about something specific to the US market, we work with like a Tara Stiles, we work with a Rick Ross, who've got that strong US-based following to really amplify that message. And I think that's where paid media is so important and it comes into play, and that's what helps us to really infiltrate, I would say, at a market level.
Great. This is one of the questions we were talking about here is, it's interesting you talk about, social is a part of it, but also there's a lot of money and content being focused on digital, and I think there's kind of a social DNA that now is being imprinted itself within all aspects of marketing, particularly with digital. But how do you think kind of digital and social is going to underline all aspects of the brand experience, and not just media decisions? So I might go down the line a little bit on this one.
I mean, I'll kick it off. I think that the landscape's already changed. Social media is paid media. I mean, it's digital, and it's, you know what I mean? So I think that the biggest convergences are happening in that space where all ready to, reach your consumer, even if you've already built that community. It's a changing landscape, so that means we need to be smarter about how we segment and target, even within the social realm. And beyond that, we would be, it'd be amiss not to talk about the, the splinter net that's being created by mobile device activation, iPad minis, etc. So, it's a puzzle for marketers, and I think things like responsive design for websites is going to be really important as we sort of shift not only how we're targeting consumers in a more focused way within the social space, but also to be thinking about their experience on a device-by-device basis.
Right.
So those things I think are two most critical things that we face every day is like, what's the experience like? How are they? It's changed everything from our email strategy to our Facebook post strategy, because the reality is 2 years ago, I'd send an email out at 6 a.m. and you'd roll up into work and you'd get to your computer and you'd be in front of that machine for the first hour and you'd go through your email, and maybe it would take you onto a shopping path or different experiences. Well, now if I shoot that email off at 6 a.m., it's the first thing they see when they wake up on their device. They're not in the mindset where they're going into a shopping or an engaging experience, and I might have lost that consumer versus maybe I push it at noon because they're having lunch and they are at their desk. So like shifting the consumer behavior as it relates to how devices are changing the game for us, whether it's in the digital or social sphere, is really important.
And maybe that morning experience, there's a continuation that happens a little bit later on in the way you develop your choreograph, your content coming out later on as well, part of that story.
Totally. I mean, I think I bet you that well over 50% of this room at 8 o'clock at night tonight will sit in front of their television with a tablet device on their lap doing 3 things at once. Maybe they're watching Apple TV, they're not even watching cable, And that's a completely different experience from a shopping as well as an engagement perspective than it was 6 months ago.
I'm just waiting for HBO to let me watch my Game of Thrones without having subscribed to the cable, and I think that's happening soon enough. So down the line, continue on this?
I completely agree, and I think that on our side of the business, what's challenging for Reebok is, I'd say roughly 70% of our sales are at wholesale partners. So Dick's Sporting Goods, Foot Locker, Finish Line. And where I had showed a slide before about how you've got the PR side of the house, you've got the trade team, you've got my team, media, and e-com. And I think media and e-com, those disciplines are really used to learning about the latest in technology, the latest media channels, and really versing yourself and understanding how the environment is consistently changing. But when it comes down to some of the disciplines like PR and trade, you're not always as up to speed. And I think that it's really important that companies make sure that they pull that training in-house and have everybody thinking about how digital comes to life. Going back to our wholesale partners, we have one partner in particular that is really trying to push the envelope. They've seen that they're doing very, very good in terms of e-commerce sales, but they're losing out on the share in terms of their mall traffic. So they're trying to kind of flip the system a bit and bring the digital experience into the retail store itself, whether it be through QR codes, they've got in-store gaming, they've got talking tables, talking mirrors, because the consumer is more in control than ever. And even if they're in a mall shopping, they want to still be able to listen to their music on their iPhone, go into a store by themselves, not to have to engage a sales clerk, go through the whole process of discovering what the shoe is about, the technology, etc., and then purchasing it. So it's really being able to make sure that you're there at every single touch point, and really allowing the consumer to engage and buy the product based on how they decide to do so. And that even rolls over into our wholesaler sites. When we think about digital, we're trying to push our trade teams as well to make sure that they're showing up properly on like the Dick's Sporting Goods website. They're part of that CRM program. They're part of their social pages because a lot of consumers are not necessarily loyal to one particular brand, but they may be loyal to a wholesaler. So you need to make sure that you're showing up properly when they start the research process.
And create a brand experience at that point of experience so it goes back into the digital when people are experiencing and sharing it back out there as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think the landscape has shifted, it's well shifted to the point where we forget as marketers sometimes that we study consumers like they're under a little glass box, and we start to define them and define ourselves and how we're going to organize ourselves to reach the consumer by channels. We say, well, we're going to be, this is the digital group and here's the social group. And it's almost, you have to do it. You have to organize yourself somehow, and we forget that even us as consumers, the minute we stop thinking that way as marketers, we go home and become consumers, we don't think that way at all. Like, I couldn't care less how any brand talks to me is organized. I could care less. I'm a avid, I wear Clark shoes a lot. I like Clarks. I have like 4 pairs of Clark shoes. I don't care how they're organized. I don't care how the departments are organized. I don't care whether their channels talk to each other. I care about the experience I have. Even I don't think about that. I just experience it. I'm not like, well, I'm going to go from, I'm watching television now, I'm going online with my mobile device, and I go, I got an offline thing here with this magazine I'm going to flip through now. And so we need to unlearn that stuff. And when we think about digital and social, it's already happened. There are generations right now who have no concept of what going online means because it's always there. And they have no concept of any difference. And we need to catch up to that pretty quickly. Both Jess and Dave have talked about some ways they've started to think about merging experiences in a world where people don't care. They want what they want. They expect to get it when they need it and when they want it. They expect anything to be available wherever they are at any time. And that's a challenge for us to unlearn the way we set ourselves up and brands set themselves up to talk to consumers. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is not to forget that as a consumer, you don't care how anybody's organized either. You just want a good experience. You want the experience to come to life for you. You want the brand to act like they care about you, to put some value on the table, and you want to start a relationship with them. And so when we become marketers, again, we need to remember those things.
Yes, it's like you said, we have to unlearn what we know because they're now the new generation that's actually saying this is how I'm going to experience the world.
Right.
Has anyone seen the video of the 11-year-old little girl trying to go through the newspaper magazines as if it was an iPad? Yeah. Right. An iPad, and she's going, don't work. This is the way. There's a gentleman over at Dignitas who just goes, his daughter calls, that's the big computer. Right. They call it the big computer when you're talking about the big screen TV. It's just, this is how they look at the world nowadays. This is how we're looking at the world.
They don't watch TV, they watch their computers.
and experience it the way they want to experience it. It doesn't have to be one particular channel or way.
But that is TV. Like that's
Yeah.
what
It is
how
to
we're trying
them.
to shift that mindset.
Right.
You know,
But-
it's video, however you consume it.
Right.
Yeah.
But the idea of this will be obsolete.
Oh
Absolutely.
yeah, you're gonna talk to your team. I mean, it's already happening. If
Yeah.
you wanna be ahead in 5 years, you'll talk to everything. It's all human interactions, to the point that little girl expects to be able to touch and feel
Right.
every picture she can see. Or they're gonna expect to be able to just say TV on and have something happen. And that's the world that we need to think about as brands, not, not even channel styles, but experiences. And what are the experiences that consumers will expect?
As long as you don't say an Australian accent, it might work.
Right.
David?
What was the question again?
Australian accent, Steve. 500.
No, I mean, I think these are all things that are shiny new objects. When you look at them in isolation, you have to look at them as a strategy. And what I've heard today is it sounds like that's what Reebok and Life is going to do. Whenever you say I'm going to have a social effort, that aside from going to a bar, maybe that's a social effort. You got to think about what the overall experience is for the consumer. It's similar to what Brian was saying. But content is becoming a silo, just like all the other things are. And content as a strategy versus content as an execution are two totally different things. You have to have a story to tell your customer. You can have multiple stories because you have multiple types of customers. The high volume Clark's buyer is going to be very different than the one-off Clark's buyer. And so what we've seen companies do there is smarter, doing this in one of two ways. Either they're organizing by customer segment, which means that it doesn't really matter what channel you're looking at, but you know what that particular type of consumer is going to do and how you message to them, how you market to them. It sounds like a lot of what Reebok has been doing. Or you have them organized by the experience they're having as they go through a process like Delta Airlines, which has teams that look not at the airport in a city, but they look at the experience somebody has in the home to airport experience for Delta. So are they checking in on a mobile device, and what does that look like when they get to the gate? And are they now, for those of you who've ever flown Delta, they thank you for everything, and they are very conscious of the whole way in which you make it to the airport. Thankfully here they have TSA pre-check, so you can get through the airport quickly. But they are very conscious of making that experience great. Then there's the onboard experience, which used to be run by operations in most airlines. And Delta is very conscious of what that experience is like on the plane. And I was flying back from New York, and the flight attendant would not stop thanking everybody on the flight, because clearly there's some metric that they're going to test afterwards. But they're just thinking about the personality of the brand, and Delta's not known for having a great personality. That's more of a JetBlue thing. But if you think about the customer and what they're experiencing in the seat, so they do one really interesting thing, and again, this is going from, they have a content strategy, and it manifests itself in very specific ways. They have something called Middle Seat Mondays. And you don't have to be a frequent flyer, but if they know your email address, they know you're in the middle seat, they will send you 500 points for your Sky Miles account because you're stuck in the middle seat on a Monday morning. And just going through that whole system and thinking about what it's like to check in on a mobile device, what it's like at the airport, and what it's like to sit in the middle seat on a Monday morning, they think about all that stuff in a customer-centric way, so they don't think about it just in terms of the platinum guys are going to get all the great experiences and the rest of the people are not. They think about everybody, but they think about it in the ways that they're going to experience a brand. And that's what I mean by sort of a content strategy. Their content is the physical experience. For other people, it's a story that you tell.
Is it 8.5 thank yous per customer? Probably 8 3/4.
Yeah, I don't know the metric. I think the metric is more like at an auto dealer where you have to, if you don't score them at 10, they get fired.
Yeah, right.
Please check out here, here, and here before I give you your receipt back in your car.
So I just think you have to separate out content and social as execution of the overall story that you're trying to tell from a content strategy perspective.
So we've spoken a lot about kind of the customer centricity approach to actually that experience, and then how can we deliver upon a better brand experience from all the touch points going forward. But one of the key elements is that this is not changing. This is the genie's out of the bottle with regards to now the consumer kind of saying, this is how I want to be treated. You recognize me, and who supports me, solves my problems, gives me great experiences, is going to win out after a period of time. But the challenge is, within organizations like Reebok and Life is Good, sometimes it's hard to actually, why is it so fragmented inside the organization to understand the customer-centric view and from a marketing standpoint? So one of the questions is, why is it so fragmented? Why is it so challenging to do? And what are some maybe tips of inside an organization to kind of get a better, a culture DNA from a customer standpoint across all the different touch points in the organization? So I might start with Jess actually on this one.
I think I alluded to some of it before too, in that it's just traditional marketing teams. You've got experts in PR and trade and media, and they're married to those particular disciplines, and I don't think that I know having been agency side, you are always exposed to the latest technology and industry trends, and then stepping over client side, it's amazing how quickly you don't have that information at your fingertips. So I think that things need to change internally. You need to make sure that you're keeping all of your employees very up to speed on this information, and really lean on your agencies as partners, not as just a traditional execution partner, but as someone who can come in, bring in the Googles, bring in the Yahoos, bring in Facebook, to have quarterly sessions and talk about the industry and what's happening, keeping everybody up to speed so that they can speak to it and understand.
So you're saying bring them in to speak, keep everyone up to speed. Are you talking about to the marketing group or to the entire company?
To the entire company, the stakeholders. And I think that it's also, it's funny how timid people can be when you're actually there tweeting or posting on behalf of the brand. It's very scary because you're acting as the face of the brand. And I think that I mentioned the hot potato before. You know, at one point it was in the hands of our global PR team, and we had things happen like in Germany, for example. We launched a campaign, and it was, their motto was cheat on your girlfriend, not your workout. That hit the social pages in the US, people freaked out. So the PR team's like, I don't want to manage this, like what do you do? How do you
Kardashians
respond?
in the trunk, yeah.
So it's just making sure that there isn't that one person or one team who's the face of the brand, but everybody is working together to craft that story and respond to it in all different channels.
We work with Good Paints, they're one of our biggest clients, and they did something really smart well before us. Their head of social media is also their head of end user insights, and that was her main focus for her first 10 years at the company, was end user insights. It was all about the customer. They had a really clear portrait of who their customers were, what is the journey their customers go on to become a customer, the consumers go on to become a customer of Good Paints. They had incredible insights, which became the backbone of all the work we did with them. And putting the customer first that way allowed a different conversation that transcended channels a little bit, and allowed us to work with them to create a story and a program that then was activated in multiple channels, because it was all about where the customer was, what they needed, and that she always had that brain on. She wasn't thinking necessarily, I need to do a social program, or I need a content marketing program. And however, whether it's through partnership with agencies, however you connect to those insights and make that the core of your story, it's all about that customer. You know, the challenge for them was shifting from, hey, people don't want to talk about paint, right? People want to talk about decorating in their house. And so they were able to translate that into a story that made sense through end user insights and being really smart about the customer. I think that's a really important thing to help us transcend those silos.
I just think there's a big fear factor. Most organizations are afraid of change, and marketers, ironically, considering that they're supposed to be the innovative, advertising, creative folks, are some of the most resistant to change, similar to your point. So, I've been in rooms where the small brands are actually the ones that can create the most change, so they have the least dollars to spend. And the traditional brands, where TV has worked for year in and year out, are really afraid of making that change to their business model, because they know it works, and they know if they add 10% in their media budget, they're going to get X% more in sales.
Yes, the hubris of success. Yes.
It's that, and it's also, the board is really afraid of all this stuff. So they're like, you know what, don't do anything, and make sure that you're really prepared before you do this. I don't know, were people watching the debates when KitchenAid did that accidental tweet? I got to meet the woman who ran the marketing department, who had to deal with that, and they actually resolved it. You never hear about that story anymore because they resolved it in 4 hours. So they had an agreement. She and the CEO had actually sat down a couple of months before that and kind of came up with a plan in case there was a social media catastrophe like that. But the fact that they had a plan, and the fact that they were able to execute without having to wake up the CEO, was a really important part of their process, which allowed them to then be more creative. But we're actually doing some research on innovation now, and a lot of it has to do with culture. And if you don't have a culture of change, you're not going to be able to do a lot of these things.
Yeah, what was the story?
Oh, sorry. So during the one of the Romney-Obama debates, there was an accidental tweet. And I don't remember exactly what the tweet said, but it said something about Obama's grandmother. And it came out under the KitchenAid handle on Twitter.
Not the individuals.
Not the individuals. What happened, the backstory of it was, if any of you still use a BlackBerry, it's not always clear which handle you are tweeting out of if you have two.
Oh, right.
So it was an accidental tweet. The guys saw it and recognized they made a mistake, and within 30 seconds it was down. It was too late. 30 seconds. And because I think it actually, if you were following, presidential debates get a lot of Twitter traffic, especially something related to Obama. So the guy was able to take it down right away, but the word had already spread. That KitchenAid had this thing about Obama's grandmother, and I wish I could remember the actual tweet. So there were news stories about it, there were journalists calling, there was this just complete firestorm that if they didn't have a reaction to it, it would have built from there. But because they had an immediate apology and they had a process for dealing with the journalists and they explained what had happened in a way that was very authentic, was, you know, this guy messed up. They handled it was very different than when a guy from Chrysler, this was sort of the first famous Twitter problem, was the guy was driving in Detroit and tweeted from his Chrysler handle that that Detroit sucks, but he didn't use sucks as the word from a traffic standpoint. So they didn't handle that very well, and he was visibly fired, and there was a much bigger issue around that particular example. But it all comes down to how comfortable is the board with these things happening, because as anybody in marketing knows, it doesn't really matter where you advertise until the board guy sees it on the site that it shouldn't have been on, maybe he or she shouldn't have been on. But until they see their advertising associated with something they're uncomfortable with, all this stuff doesn't matter. But as soon as they do, you know, everything breaks loose. So I think that's the resistance part, is if somebody grew up in traditional marketing, they're thinking very much about how is this a one-way mechanism and how do I make sure all my channels are operating appropriately. But what we hear from the storytellers side of the room is you don't want to think about the old way of marketing. You want to think about this as a holistic experience. You just have to be prepared for some of the impact that can have. And I love that German example, actually. That's a classic example of cross-border issues.
And it's like,
a little more conservative.
and sometimes the cultural change can be, you know, organically happening with the company, but like sometimes change is you hit a crisis point, and I think, you know, unfortunately, not to go back history-wise, Domino's, they had that issue that happened with the bad, you know, inappropriate behavior of some of their employees, but they handled it amazingly. And then from that standpoint on, they said, we now have to have a presence, own our presence, and do this a lot more effectively. And it was like a decision overnight says, we're in the weeds, we're going to do this, we're going to be over here, we're going to broadcast on Facebook, but we really didn't do this. Issue happened, they resolved it in the form in which it kind of came out in, and said, now we're going for it. So sometimes there are those pivotal points anyways. I think one of the interesting things you talk about marketing is a lot of companies still use marketing as a department, not as a kind of a culture movement and so forth. So that's kind of an interesting aspect right from there. Now it's interesting when you think about social, a lot of people kind of, SEO and paid media doesn't get a lot of attention per se. And it's almost like this kumbaya thing. No, it's about the fans, and I give out to all the people. If they love our content, they will come and spread the joy. But yet that's within like a small echo chamber of people. But I'm curious as to this group's, what's your take on how SEO, paid, and created content, branded content actually plays within the whole digital social realm?
I can start. We actually have a media department here at DIG because we believe in investing in ways to distribute. You're going to create an experience, and that experience has people and tools and content at the core of it that brings their story to life. And for the early parts of social, when people were building these things, the landscape was littered with these awesome experiences and tumbleweed blowing through them because nobody was going there. Because everybody was relying on what Bob said, the awesomeness of the thing and the viral sharing, and all of a sudden we're going to have 1 million people there. And forgetting you need to create those pathways. And if you do so smartly through content distribution, where you're making sure that the part of the experience that is relevant shows up in a place that's also relevant, so it feels like an organic part of that. When we create tools for Glidden, we distribute those so you can experience the tool right there. We're not making you come somewhere else. The goal of the media department is to find those places, create a spot for that experience to live, and give people an hors d'oeuvre, if you will, of the hub experience or the core experience. Or in some cases, there is no core, all a distributed experience. But paid media fuels that. We find, amazingly, you get lots of traction to create spaces for your content and for your people if you go to a partner with money. And that doesn't mean you co-opt the experience at all. The experience still remains true. You're not having them write about how awesome Glidden paints are. The experience is about the joy of decorating and how do you go from a moment of inspiration to getting paint in the wall. And that's a story that can play in lots of places editorially through the work we do with paid media. And a lot of tools can bring that to life also.
I think it's also how you're defining paid media. I think it's very much content-based now, and we are a good example in terms of our fitness story. We're trying to, of course, motivate everybody to live a healthy lifestyle, giving examples of fitness routines, food, nutrition, just healthy lifestyle in general. But we certainly, as a brand for Reebok, we're not experts in that space, so that's where we rely on our endemic partners and even our bloggers and our brand assets to help fuel some of that content, and then we hook it up with the optimal product to help you with those fitness regimes, etc. So I think that paid media more and more is important, not just to get the message out there to the masses, but also to really ground yourself in terms of content that really validates what you stand for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to us. Like, we recently launched a new sort of core message to our brand, which is positive purpose. And positive purpose generally represents everything life is good is all about. It's about spreading optimism, it's about helping kids, it's about our festival, etc. So that message is really multifaceted. We announced 10% of our annual net profits for kids. But we'd be doing a disservice if we weren't, making sure we were the #1 person showing up on Google when positive purpose was searched.
Yeah.
So, we create the content, we create user-generated engagement off of that idea, but you need to be 360. We need to be pulling it. I cater back to my Digitas days with Glenn when I believe there was a Kermit the Frog ad that a competitor was doing to the General Motors, which I was working on at the time, and they did an amazing job with this hybrid ad. What they didn't do was any search engine marketing. So I think we ended up capturing a lot of the traffic because we knew they were doing a Kermit the Frog ad, and we had captured the paid component of it. In the digital world, or in the social world as it is today, that experience would have been far different, but the idea there is like you have to be capturing all points, all touch points within the funnel, or else you're leaving yourself exposed, and the competitor's going to come in and take your space.
Yeah, I remember it was only 3 years ago where the first promoted tweet happened around the Super Bowl. And it was just like spend millions and millions of dollars promoting this thing, and sometimes I'm just going to buy the promote tweet right here in this little hashtag. How about this? And then came right up. And then stuff that's happening on many social platforms right now, where they're changing a little bit of their algorithms, so you could have this great fan base right here, you put yourself up there, it's just not going to filter up as much as it used to before. Good, bad, or indifferent, that's just the reality where it is.
Well, the Google algorithm is different too now, where it's more about quality content than it is about some of the content games that people used to be able to play to help their content rise to the top. They're getting smarter about knowing they need to pay that off, pay off an experience, right? That you're searching for something, and the more they can pay off with a valuable piece of content that helps you find what you're looking for, the better they'll be. That's better for us because that just means that we no longer have to worry about the games, we have to worry about the quality experience, which is, from an end user standpoint, what we should be caring about anyways.
I mean, it's not like NBC and Condé Nast don't have huge marketing departments.
Right.
If you have content, you have to tell people about it. You can't just assume they're going to, Vanity Fair may have the best article in the world about whatever, but unless they market it, nobody's going to know about it.
Right.
So you can't assume that as a marketer that you have content around your brand that people are just going to find it because they love your brand. You have to push it out a little bit.
So to come by our social people every once in a while, great content, great experiences, but let's promote it out there as well so it gets beyond this unique fan base, if you will, as well. Interesting when we talk about, the ultimate measurement of a brand experience or business success sometimes is down to, am I increasing my profit margin, my market share? Am I selling more goods and services? Am I affecting the bottom line? Am I affecting a particular cause movement that I want to be creating that avenue? So everyone sometimes at the executive board level says these are the things that really matter to us, and you got to take those into consideration. Along the way, what are some of the ways that what are the elements that kind of marketing and other tools need to be working more closely together to kind of deliver that? If I'm explaining that correctly, it's like from a marketing standpoint, all the different departments, what needs to be working closer together to kind of deliver upon those ultimate goals?
In terms of KPIs, like measurement.
Yep. But how do you do that?
We're still working through that. I think every
Life is progress.
No, but every brand has that challenge. I think social right now for us, we're measuring overall engagement, organic reach, people talking about the brand and overall sentiment, because we've really just used it as a branding platform. From an ROI standpoint, we're still trying to figure out how we're measuring that specifically. But I do think we have some great insights, in particular from a lifestyles category standpoint. We've been doing a series of, I think we've probably launched 30 different individual product drops throughout the US, and the only support that we've given those is via social media. And we've seen that those on average are selling out within 24 to 48 hours, the entire product across the US. So I think that's a really strong indicator of how you can use social to drive your overall ROI.
Right.
But I think that it's really a matter of getting, again, those silos broken down, developing a cohesive dashboard, if you will, so everybody knows what metrics they're accountable for and how they're going to play a role in that
And do you have a program inside to kind of help celebrate those successes and information across the entire organization and throughout?
That is something that we're working
Okay.
on, yeah.
So we do a lot with like, you know, getting back to what David said about Apple like early on regarding the device evolution. I actually think what makes them most successful is that their mission is actually, they rally people around innovation, sleek design, and because of that, they're not a computer company. Because that's what they're really about. And you know, for their first device, if you remember the emotional connection that they delivered through like those like outlined silhouettes of people like jamming out to music, like that's their storytelling, but it's also their emotional trigger, and it allowed them to go into a lot of different avenues. It's similar for us in terms of how we're singularly focused on our mission, and that's why we think it's not just T-shirts. We can do greeting cards with Hallmark, etc. And on the analytics side, from a social media perspective, what we found is that we really want to have the pulse at all times. So every Monday morning, I get a pulse report that basically gives me all of the top line metrics. We actually have a very strong return on investment from a revenue generation perspective from our posts, but we don't say buy now. It's actually about the emotional message of like, you know, don't be sad that it's over, be happy that it happened. With one of our graphics, people connect with that on an emotional level, they click through and they purchase, but it's completely counterintuitive to how a lot of brands try to just outwardly commercialize their brand. So we look at that, you know, we look at the impressions, the number of people reached, but we also really dig in on the elements that are not necessarily about marketing metrics. So for instance, what product requests are we getting? And are we feeding those back into product development so that they know that 50 really in the last 2 weeks want a paddleboard tee, you know? And really having sort of the multifaceted approach of like, top line, we're delivering sales, we're delivering traffic, but also being intuitive and reactive enough to be able to understand that there's really so much listening that you need to be doing, and if you feed that back into the organization,
Absolutely.
It's just gonna, you know, drive success.
Yeah, it's just not marketing and sales. It's about how we're going to innovate as a brand and
It's
deliver something
completely
back.
not marketing and sales.
Yeah.
It's completely not. It's everything. It's product development. It's
I'm going to
customer
change the name of the
service.
breakfast to it's completely not about marketing and sales.
It really isn't. It really feeds all aspects of your business, and if people are open, you know, we're lucky enough that this was a, you know, life is good to smaller company, that there aren't preconceived notions and walls set up, because at the end of the day, social media is a lot like air traffic control. Like, no one owns it. Everyone owns it. So if you have good collaboration, you can get in a room with your PR people and customer service group and everyone, and really develop a plan. And it's an air traffic control room that we should all be listening to and figuring out how to just make better for the organization.
I think you bring up a great point in terms of kind of flipping that analytical approach, because I said before, 70% of our business is done at wholesale. And oftentimes, specific products, colors, styles only get sold in via those wholesale partners, and then we won't have other products make it to the marketplace. But we've seen sometimes something that isn't sold in at wholesale does really well on e-commerce. So how can we kind of flip the switch and educate all the wholesale partners on maybe you should consider a pink and yellow colorway because it's you know, kicking butt online. It's really getting great reviews when we push it out to the social sphere. So those are things that we want to try to bring to our wholesale partners as well.
We think about analytically, we think about the 3 Ps here, but I think we try to push them as far as we can because there's no time that the CMO is not, or the CEO is not going to care what am I selling. And the technology is not always there, but we think it's our job to push. And so we have successes where we're working with IBM to implement a code in their core metrics measurement system, so we know when we're passing off a lead from some of our bloggers who are publishing content for us. In other cases, branding is a success metric, and we're able to do some focus groups to look at brand lift on somebody's engagement experience. You know, we're creating an experience that's supposed to develop a relationship that's supposed to pay off as a customer at some point. And if we don't do our job as an agency pushing as hard as we can to get the penultimate metric or the ultimate metric on each of those avenues of the brand, the business, and the other one, which we were talking about, is the buzz, which is that conversation piece, which in many cases just tells us how we're doing in that relationship piece, right? Are we creating an experience you like? Do you want more of this, less of this? Something we can measure day to day and evolve to make sure that we're doing our job to funnel to the other two. If we don't have that relationship, then we can't change your perception of the brand or your relationship with the brand. And we certainly can't drive a customer. And so, you know, we try to be that voice that connects those dots. Like, we think that's our job because social sits in lots of places, and organizations start to care about it. So we can be that voice ringing that bell saying we need to put that code on that site. Otherwise, somebody's going to say, I've got 5,000, you know, likes. I've got 50,000 fans. So, and we're going to be stuck answering that question without the right metrics.
Yeah, I mean, most CMOs ask the question about attribution. It's not about any, like I was saying earlier, it's not just about any one channel. So Wendy Clark, who runs most of marketing for Coca-Cola, just said they just finished a study that said that social had no direct impact on sales, but it had a lot of indirect impact on sales. So it really depends on setting the goals up front. It's not really about, it's not just about brand. If it is about brand, then you can tell a very different story than it's about sales. Or it could just be about listening for product development. So social, you know, I actually compare it to the phone system, not air traffic control, because hopefully somebody knows air traffic control. But with the phone, if you think about the phone, everybody has it, but everybody uses it for a different reason, right? Some people have a quick call to make, some people are making a pitch, some people are calling their aunt in Tulsa. And somebody makes sure that it works, but nobody dictates how you're going to use it. And so that's how I tend to think about it, is that because we had the question of, you know, who should own this technology of social media. Like, well, if you're in marketing, you probably don't want to have to be the one managing whether the phone system works or not, but you do want to make sure that you're using it in a way that's appropriate for your job. So that's how we think about it as a phone system, because it's so fundamental, yet so broad at the same time. Yeah,
it certainly reminds me of the one laptop per child when they started rolling that out and promoting it, and there was so much talk about we've got this 2-for-1 type program, the technology is amazing, look what we can actually put down in here. And no one was telling the stories of actually how it actually allowed one community to actually get closer to another community down the way, because people came to one person's, you know, place because they could actually read a story late night. They could go down, they used it as their nightlight to go get water to bring it back in. They did these other things with the technology, not the story that they were wanting to be promoting out there. So it's interesting to say what they're going to do with it. Let's find and celebrate that. Just a few more questions here. You know, mobile has changed everything to a certain degree, but not just like the devices and what we have on us, but kind of our desire for like instant access to information, experiences, and action being taken. You know, how does that change? And you know, how does mobile then that experience of that desire to know I want to get that now and have that experience now change the way CMOs and marketers need to be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think a lot of them have started with a mobile-first strategy. It's still sort of rising up in the marketing organization, I would say. CMOs are asking the questions now, but 2 years ago they were asking how do mobile and social tie together, but because they didn't see them as separable. But now they're asking how can we activate in mobile. But it's the same thing. It's a channel. There are a lot of things that are mobile-first things. Like I thought that what you said about the email is very true, because if you're just swiping delete all of my junk mail in the morning at 6 a.m. before you actually look at the email you need to read, you've just lost an opportunity. So mobile is changing behavior in a way which is why it's now getting on the CMO's radar screen, not because mobile is interesting from a device standpoint, but because it's interesting from how it's changing consumer behavior and changing the way people think about things. So mobile first as a design point is what we're hearing mostly from the tech companies still. You know, Facebook has a mobile first design element, as does Google. But the marketers are thinking about how does mobile change the way I relate to my customer in a way that can actually create what we call a digital bridge between me and my customer that they couldn't have done before. Particularly the brand manufacturers for whom this is probably as close as you'll ever get to a consumer, is to be able to push them something that can become embedded on their phone and absent of any of the retailers that you're working with. But it's still trying to understand, you know, what information can they get and how does it, it's hard, because all of a sudden you've got a lot more information, and managing the data element behind mobile is as complex, or probably more so than just social, because social at least is very unstructured, you really don't know what's true or not. Mobile has a lot of truth to it, but how do you manage that data?
But does it also change the availability of the experience and the content that you would say, this is in this form, but now everyone's like, if I'm going to engage in it, I need it in a snackable standpoint.
Well, that's the idea behind responsive design, is that you're not, you don't want to create, you know, I say this all the time to folks, you don't want to go off and create yet another silo, because that's what mobile represents, and that's what a lot of people wind up doing, is the shiny new object person in the company says, hey, we got a mobile thing, let's go do a mobile thing, and the number of apps that have been created to the point about all the Facebook pages and Twitter handles.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's, you know, oh, let's go create an app because somebody in tech decided to build something off the shelf. So it's another piece of that. If you don't have a content strategy, then you could do a lot of mobile, but it may not add up to much. It may be hugely successful, but it'll be an accident.
And it's about relevance too, like,
Right.
so if you break it up into a couple different pieces of the puzzle, I do think responsive is gonna hit hard in the e-commerce space in a significant way, and that, you know, end-up platforms, it's just not the way to go, so that's just like a definite red flag. If your organization's talking about building an M-dot, I would look into responsive, even though there's no leader in that space necessarily for an e-commerce, there's opportunities out there, most of the major platforms are starting to build them. But beyond that, from like an experiential perspective, at the end of the day, as marketers, we must ask ourselves, what value do we add to the consumer experience? So that can range, so from where I sit, we say, how do we supplement the experience with social at the festival? So we might hide a Jake face and tweet, find the Jake face, get upgrade to VGP. And that's just a simple way in which they can use that device and engage with us to change their dynamic or to have an added layer. It's not to create noise or something, we call it joys as opposed to noise in the marketplace. Like at a festival, you can create a new element of an experience. In store, you know, you can create a new engagement level within the experience. But I think if you take something away from today, the thematic element of social's main role in a lot of the organizations we're talking about is the 360 days of the year that we're not in a purchase cycle with that consumer, right? And if brands are evolving, we ask ourselves every day, how do we become a service? Because to your point, like, you want to be relevant every single day. And as we believe we're lifestyle brands, for us, there's a lot of ways we can engage with the consumer every single day to further the mission. It has nothing to do with asking them to buy a t-shirt. So it really just comes down to, you know, separating out the idea of a purchase cycle from what value or role do you play in a consumer's life. And if you're lucky enough to work on a brand that has relevance and can represent something and really fulfill a need for your consumer, leverage mobile as well as all your other touch points to develop experiences that continue to reinforce what you represent for your consumer base.
I think it's sort of like an ethnography of mobile. The ethnography of mobile is very different than the ethnography of sitting in front of a TV screen, but they're just as important in understanding how people behave within a particular setting.
Mobile's really tricky because people have a real personal relationship with their phones. I mean, you have your photos of your kids on here. You've got all of your songs. It's really more than a laptop. Certainly more than TV. It feels like it's part of your most important stuff, right? If you were to run out of a burning bus, you'd make sure you had your wallet, keys, phone, right? And then my phone is really important. So that kind of thought needs to go into the experience. David did a good job talking about that. Make sure it's relevant, but it has to be really relevant to how you use your phone. The idea of photography seems to be a prevalent way people are using it to activate an event or activate something live, because that's how people use their phones. It feels natural to something that's so personal. And I think that's I think there hasn't been an explosion in mobile because people are treading carefully and think about how they do it. So they don't just create another app that sits among the sort of glut of apps that don't do anything and don't really add value. And in some cases, they're just sort of annoying. You know, it's another chance. You know, email used to be this way. Email was very personal. It's gotten less personal now. And that's where email marketers might have missed sometimes because they forgot it was a really personal thing. This is my space. It's my inbox. And if you're going to come in there, you better add some value, some serious value. You better know something about me and do something real that I care about. And mobile's even more important that way.
I think take all the applications and engagement out of it, because absolutely I agree with what all of you guys are saying, but I think it's also important that you remember when you're out there as a consumer using your phone, I often just do research. So making sure that your website is mobile enabled and that you're investing in mobile paid search. How many consumers do we have going into the mall and they're looking at a ZigTech and they want to do research and get consumer reviews, find out more about the product, price compare in store. We need to make sure that we're strongly showing up in that simple form before we even invest in more applications and more engagement.
Including tablet, mobile traffic to our platform from, where are we in 2013? In 2011, it was probably in the 15 to 20% of traffic range. Last year, it was about 25%, and with the tablet explosion of holiday, it's over 30%. that's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think it's also important to say what Jess says that I think Google last year put out that 60 to 70% of all major first parts of research are happening on mobile devices, and then they're taking it on to other tabs and other devices to kind of further explore the experience, to kind of know that that's the impetus where you need to maybe start.
And if you need a random good TED Talk, there's actually a really interesting one out there about how, like, by definition, we're already cyborgs because of the extension of ourselves throughout these devices. It's actually a really interesting TED Talk. You guys might be interested.
So with that, I'd love to be able to open it up to this great group to ask some questions. Yeah, right here.
Mike Merriman with Mazinga. We've been talking a lot about B2C, social marketing, and even with your consumer brands, we do a lot of B2B2C business, 85% of your channels. And I was wondering how you're using social to engage with either those channels or straight B2B types of engagements.
I think we just really focus on B2C. We have enlisted a lot of our partners at the Finish Line with sporting goods to develop social contests and leverage their followers as well as ours to really tout those brands together.
We do a lot of work with IBM and Harvard Program and GE in the B2B space. And there's a lot of work to bring thought leadership to life. There's a lot of work, there's a much more focused group than the broader consumer base where you're able to understand that audience really well and pay off the value propositions through content. So we do a lot of content building and community building. We've also found that for B2B, arming our clients, folks, to be able to talk to their business partners through social and activate their networks as salespeople. That was really important. We do a lot of training with these folks socially to help them figure out how to bring a social platform to life that allows them to service their business partners better. And so it's providing them the content, the tools, and then making sure that they're most important folks on how to use it.
Yeah, I think about it in two ways. One is distribution of thought leadership is a big one, or any other kind of content, but thought leadership is the one that's going to be able to, you get the soundbite and then they click through and they start the process. The other is we're seeing more and more companies use either Yammer or Chatter through Salesforce or any of these other tools to engage with their partners. So creating these sort of private social communities that are cross-company, which you never could do before. You'd have to pick up the phone and call to find there. So we're seeing social be used more as a tool to enable ongoing conversation, not just a way to create awareness.
Yeah, like you were talking about earlier, like keep that experience going along with that brand, independent of them actually being in a sales cycle, buying cycle, recommendation. Because you want to have a recommendation cycle, word of mouth cycle, community stuff is fantastic for that.
That's why the thought leadership is important to me. How often are we in the market if you're a good market company for an IBM server? Not all that often, but we want to make sure we're there when you are.
But social will replace commissions.
Yeah. Patrick in the back.
I have a question about the kind of technology behind content marketing. What's some of the technology that you're using right now to make content marketing easier for you as a company? And what are maybe some technologies that you're looking forward into the future?
So right now we have a lot of content distribution partners who are able to be really targeted based on what is in the body of a piece of existing content that we can embed ourselves into from a targeting standpoint. Targeting is really important because we don't want to just distribute content and have it show up in an ad space where people are sort of conditioned to ignore it. We don't want to have it show up in the body of a piece of content where it's not relevant. And so the relevancy and the targeting is something we're doing a lot of. One of the things we're getting that we're sort of looking forward to doing more of is as content marketing becomes more about the image, things like Pinterest and Facebook's redesigned to highlight imagery. We do a lot of work with Reebok creating static images that are meant to be great social impressions. There are new vendors coming out that are allowing you to tie experiences into that so that by playing with that image, you can actually bring to life other aspects of the experience. You can also, really important, tie in metrics. So it becomes, you can take it beyond impressions and understand how that image, that beautiful image you crafted of this new shoe product is actually driving people to Reebok.com or driving people to FinishLine.com or Foot Locker to actually drive a sale. And I think that's a really important piece that's been missing for the image-based content marketing.
Yes, you have a question right here.
Yes, and I started, my name is Liz Gottbart from Boston. We spoke to this a little bit, but getting back to the metrics, how are you seeing behavioral data that you're getting from social media and your e-commerce sites? You're seeing with Netflix coming out with House of Cards, you're seeing data-driven content decisions. I was wondering if you could speak to how you're finding your data play into that ROI and also your content and product decisions.
It's a great question. And I think that we wouldn't necessarily get to the point that we want to be at yet. Like I said before, we're trying more and more to gather this social measurement insight to fuel what we're housing on e-com and also influence some of the sell-in at retail. But I think that we're not there exactly yet.
We, on our side, we didn't even have a marketing department until about 2.5 years ago. So when you don't have that, the beautiful thing you do a lot of is listening. And, you know, because of that, we still try to listen a lot. So a couple of examples I think are just sort of, again, being true to your brand, as well as listening to your consumer and focusing where you really hear them making noise. So an example would be we had an individual reach out to us who, her mom basically saying, like, we love your brand, we've been to every festival, and we moved to Texas 6 months ago, and our 12-year-old daughter, who basically thinks like you guys are like her Bruce Springsteen, like Bert Jacobs is her Bruce Springsteen. She needs a heart transplant. We just found out. She just got sick, and we were like, whoa, we were blown away. They given us a video. They just posted on our Facebook wall. And as an example, Bert was actually in Texas, and Texas is a big state, but we diverted him. We actually moved him out of business meetings to go meet this family. And based on that experience, because we're lucky enough that to have sort of a philanthropic element, I flew down there. We did like a 10-minute video on her optimism because it's really powerful and it could be very useful to others that might be facing challenges. So we call that fuel, and we look for it every day. So our content development strategy in a lot of ways is to tell stories that speak to the lifestyle and the inspiration that we want to put back out into the world. And in the same way, completely counter to that story is last Halloween, we do really well in our t-shirt business on Halloween and special holidays, and like I just felt like there was a cultural coming of age for zombies, because who doesn't love zombies? And like vampires are over and zombies are here. So we listened to the consumer, right? We heard that, like we saw that there was like a zeitgeist in the culture around zombies, and we created a killer zombie tee, and we couldn't keep it in stock for 2 months. We were just like trying to go back to the printer to print more of those shirts because we heard what they said, we believed in it, we found a way to make it fit our lifestyle, and we just attacked the market. So, the point there is like, content is really important. People spend a lot of money on it. At the same time, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. And, my whole thing recently has been in that realm is like, we need to develop great content and have great distribution of that content. We still do, but at the same time, you need to be really careful because there's so much content out there that unless you really are honing in on something meaningful, it can be really challenging to break through. So just, the listening for us.
Yeah, you wouldn't have had that fuel if you didn't have the listening.
Right.
That real-time data is so important for us to use all the time when we shape our stories for clients. We worked recently on a strategy with a major retailer who had a grilling site. They wanted to really make it bigger. There weren't a lot of people engaging with it. And the site, the content was all about like dudes and grills and like ribs and how do you cook ribs, and lots of guys showing off their aprons and their giant, your trailer truck sized grills. And when we did a bunch of research, we found that most of the conversation, there's a huge volume of conversation happening around the experience of being outdoors with your family and the birthday parties and the 4th of July barbecues. And it's not the grill, it's what does the grill enable, right? And how does the grill become the center of the celebration? And that's a story that suddenly has scale, has appeal beyond the sort of narrow focus of dudes and ribs, and becomes a family story, becomes a story that moms will care about, and the kid who's grilling at his, having a tailgate party before the Patriots preseason games will care about. And it becomes a story that becomes something relevant to lots of people. And it was something they weren't focused on. And we do that all the time because your scale and your relevance will be driven by your ability to understand what people are actually caring about, where the conversations are, and not necessarily your own interpretation of what you think people like.
And I'm definitely going to have you for my next voiceover for my monster truck.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Yeah,
Ribs.
Sunday. Everyone must go. Butch back here.